21. Let's go ahead and finish our story about Gladys Allward. Now we're going to be in our reader book on page 221. So remember yesterday, she and Dr. Huang they had been almost 2 weeks over all these mountains, and they were out of food and they were out of water, and they had to kneel down and ask God to help them. And Dr. Huang actually asked for someone to witness to. And then the monk came in and just bam, there he was. And he said, no, we're going to have y'all come and stay with us, even though you're a woman, because we've been waiting on someone to tell us about the God who loves. So that's what this section is called, the God who loves. So let's look at a couple of words that we might run across. Holes and cracks in the sidewalk are recesses for weeds to grow. Now recesses that word has many uses or meanings, but in this one it's kind of like a spot that's kind of like a hole. It's kind of hollowed out a little bit, a place where a weed could come up in. The tour guide escorted us back to the hotel. Escorted means went before us and just kind of helped us to get through the crowd. By asking over and over again, his persistence got him an answer. Oh, persistence. How little children know persistence. Mama, 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 mama. Persistence. It's asking someone over and over, saying something again and again and again. Communists believe, and I spelled believe wrong, communists believe the government should own everything. So a communist is someone who believes that the government should own everything. That's what they are. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at 221. Now, why are the llamas waiting for someone to tell them about the God who loves? Apparently they've heard, but now they want to know some more, right? All right, so without, you follow along with me. Without another word, Gladys followed the two men. They crossed the mountain ridge, and Gladys gasped in amazement. The other side of the barren mountain they had been climbing was lush and green. Thick grass grew along the slopes, and water ran over the rocks. Brightly flowered vines drooped from the walls of a beautiful temple on the crest of a slope. Gladys and Dr. Huang followed the monk down a trail to the temple gates. As the huge carved gates closed behind them, Gladys stared in amazement. They were standing in a large courtyard. Sunlight patterned the cool shadows of the courtyard and gleamed off golden statues and recesses along the walls. A movement in the shadows caught Gladys's attention. A group of yellow-clad llamas came forward and bowed. They led Gladys and Dr. Huang to rooms that had been prepared for them. Gladys rested comfortably on tiger rugs and silk cushions as water and dish after dish of delicious food were brought to her. Later, two monks escorted Gladys and Dr. Huang through several courtyards to a large room near the center of the lamasery. Nearly 500 llamas were seated there in half circles. Gladys and Dr. Huang were taken to the front. "Whatever shall we do?" Gladys whispered. "You must sing," Dr. Huang said. So Gladys began to sing. When she finished, there was a deathly silence. She looked at Dr. Huang. Dr. Huang stood up and began to speak. He told about the birth of Jesus, of his life, and how he died on the cross at Calvary. Gladys sang again, and then she talked. When she finished, Dr. Huang spoke again. Gladys sang another song and talked. Then it was Dr. Huang's turn, and so it went. Gladys couldn't see the faces of the llamas. The silence was unbroken except for the sound of Dr. Huang's voice as he spoke. Finally, Gladys said, "I must rest. I'm afraid I'm going to fall off this seat." "Then we will finish," said Dr. Huang. They rose and walked straight out into the hall. Behind them they heard the first sounds of movement since they had entered the room. They reached their rooms, and a tired Gladys began to prepare for bed. A knock sounded at the door. When she opened it, two monks stood outside. "Woman, are you too tired to tell us more?" "Are you allowed to enter?" Gladys asked. "If there are two of us," they answered. "Then come in." Far into the night, more llamas kept on coming. They sat around the room listening. They accepted without question God's creation of the world. The virgin birth, the miracles, it was God's love that amazed them. Over and over they asked to be told about Calvary. Gladys and Dr. Huang stayed for a week answering questions. On the last day of their visit, Gladys was taken before the head lama. She sat on a stool beside him and listened as he told her his story. For many years, he explained, the monks of this lamasery have collected an herb that grows on the mountainside. The herb is much desired in the cities and has always brought a good price. Some years ago, after the herb had been harvested and dried, it was taken to the city as usual. As the monks passed through a village on the way, a man stood on the side of the road waving a piece of paper. Curious, a monk stopped and took the piece of paper. He tucked it inside his robe and brought it back after the herbs had been sold. The Lama interrupted his story and pointed to a worn piece of paper stuck on the wall behind him. Leaning closer, Gladys saw an ordinary tract on which was written in Chinese the words of John 3:16, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish but have everlasting life." "The God who loves," Gladys murmured softly. The Lama nodded. "Yes," he said as he continued his story. "When we sent the herbs to be sold the next year, the men were instructed to find out more about the God who loved the world, but for 5 years they heard nothing. Finally, one year they decided to keep going until they found someone who could tell them more about this God. When they reached the city of Linchao, their persistence was rewarded. They found a man who told them to go to the building that had Faith, Hope, and Charity carved above the door. In that building they found someone who told them more and gave them the 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The men hurried back to share their news. Eagerly we read the Gospels and believed what we read. However, there was much that was not clear to us. Over and over we read the verse, 'Go ye into all the world and preach the gospel.' At last we realized all we had to do was wait. This God would send a messenger to us to tell us more. So for another 3 years, we waited. Last week, 2 of our lamas were out on the hillside gathering sticks. They heard you sing. Believing that only those who know God will sing as you did, they knew that God's messengers had arrived. One hurried back to the lamasery with the news of your arrival, and we began preparations for you as our guests. The other hurried down to meet you and bring you back to us. Gladys listened to the end of the story in awe of God's love and power, knowing she was listening to an account of the working of the Holy Spirit. Truly, Lord, she thought as she remembered the tracts, the mission, and the young Christians who had been so faithful in their prayers. It is as Paul said, "I have planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the increase." Gladys and Dr. Huang began their long trip back, enriched in mind and spirit. Years later, Gladys learned that the communists had destroyed the lamasery and driven the lamas away. She never discovered what happened to those 500 lamas. Gladys trusted the Lord, knowing that he could finish what he had begun in his own way, in his own time. Okay, that's a great story. What do you think happened to the lamas? Do you think they killed them? They probably fled before they got them. I don't know. So the head lama told Gladys about what happened, and they had received that little piece of paper when they had gone to town, and it just said a little bit about John 3:16. They waited 5 years, and after 5 years they went back, and that's when they got Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and they believed it, but they needed more, and they still didn't understand. So they waited and they waited and they waited until finally they heard them and they went to get them, and then that they were told. So, and that is God's providence for sure. Okay, so there are 2 pages, but we're only going to do 1 today, and you're going to do it yourself because it is a graded page. I'd like for you to complete page 91 in your work text, and make sure that 5 through 10, make sure you use complete sentences on those, okay? All right, if you have any questions or you need any help, let me know. That's all for today.